All right. What kind of atmosphere did you grow up in terms of religion?
So I was born in Oklahoma. I grew up in Fort Worth, Texas. So it was a Protestant Christian background, and pretty much everyone I knew was conservative. I didn't really know any alternate viewpoints from that.
Right. Okay. So when did you come to the realization that you were an atheist?
It sort of felt like a gradual thing that happened over the course of like my teenage years. I think it really started to happen when I was 14. It kind of feels like this process of like disillusionment, almost like kind of having a bad breakup. You start to realize like there's cracks in like the foundation of this logic, and it was
Right.
something that like I had assumed was real from like a very young age, but I was also into trouble a lot because like I was a very curious person, and I went to a Lutheran private school, and I found soon out that people don't like when you ask questions because it sort of reveals like the inadequacies in the logic
Right.
that they're espousing. So like ultimately I became an atheist because there is no proof in God. If there was proof in God, I would choose to become an atheist. But since there is no proof, there is no practical reason to
Right.
believe.
I agree.
But
were there any particular like things that you read or were introduced to that kind of helped sway you, or to see the light, or for a lot of us it was just a closer look at the Bible, and but I'm curious, were there any like a lot of people talk about how they read Dawkins and it opened their eyes. Was there anything like that kind of helped you along your path?
That's interesting that you mentioned that, because I think it was the Bible for me, because as I got older, I started becoming sort of more devoted and more wanting to learn about Christianity. But I found that the more I read, like the more confused I became, especially reading the Old Testament, and you'll see like Yahweh is a very like a violent, jealous like God who sort of like doesn't prescribe to his own rules.
Right.
So, and we're all taught that like God's loving and God cares about us, but like the reality looks much different when viewed inside the Bible.
No, I agree. And so you mentioned growing up in Oklahoma. Where are you at now? Where do you live these days?
I actually live in San Diego right now.
Oh, okay.
But I spent most of my adult life in Austin, Texas.
Oh, okay. Austin's fairly liberal, right, as far as this part of the country, right? Or
yeah,
it's better than Oklahoma.
It's
right?
like it's
Kansas.
kind of like a little blue dot in a sea of red. Yeah.
See, I live in Kansas, so I'm well aware of what that looks like, what that feels like, to just be surrounded by conservatives and church folks and
right.
It's kind of maddening once you become an atheist and you look around and just everyone states as a fact, the Bible, like that's the fact, and it's pretty crazy. But
yeah, I was the only atheist I knew, so it was a very isolating experience, I'd say.
Right. So I was curious, you're also a lesbian, and I was curious, was your family more upset by the news that you were a lesbian or that you were an atheist, or was it all just, or did they care?
So I'm actually bisexual, but it's kind of the same issue. I thought I was a lesbian when I was younger, so I felt like they were more upset. I felt like they were more upset by the atheism, because I had tried to keep that hidden for a long time.
Right.
And of course, that is sort of like a damning thing. You're essentially saying your child is being sent to hell, as opposed to like, well, this is a sin, but we can like look past that.
Did you ever flirt with, a lot of us flirt with agnosticism at one point before we become a full-fledged atheist. Did you ever have that period, or did you just jump right into, like, I'm an atheist? How did that go for you?
So I'd say technically, because there is a agnosticism, well, I'm an agnostic atheist, which is essentially like, I can't say for sure, but like I'm positing that there is no God. I think a lot of people see agnosticism as sort of like an in-between point. And there was a point after I decided that I was not believing in Christianity anymore, that I was like looking into like paganism and all these other kind of like new age spiritual things. But like the more I read about different religions, the more I saw that like their fallacies were all kind of the same.
Right. Let's see. I was wondering, is religion and, like why people believe in those things and, all of that, obviously that was of interest to you at one point. Is that still an interest to you?
Religion, you mean?
Religion and, like why people fall for that basically and, all of that. Like that's always been one of the things that's most interested me, and I was just curious, is that still an interest that you hold?
Yeah, I think it's really fascinating actually because when you think about religion, it was before we had science as like a tool. So it's sort of like I felt at one point it was a very useful way to sort of like help humans like evolve consciously because, you're, as far as you know, you're the only intelligent thing in the universe. And so you sort of extrapolate from that, like, well, there must have been something bigger than us, whether or not that's true. And then sort of use that as like a narrative of like who you are and where you're going. Right. Because that's like a very important part of being human is like having that narrative of like your life and what the purpose is.
I'm sure I know the answer to this, but I'm curious, do you see religion as being a good thing or a bad thing? Like, can it be a good thing or is it pretty much always a bad thing? I mean, what's your take on that?
It's both.
Right.
It's kind of like when Nietzsche said, I think it was in The Gay Science, I'm not sure, where he said, God is dead, and essentially like because the age of enlightenment had come, that we were sort of casting off those old ideas of religion. But the problem was that religion, at least from that perspective, gave us morality, and then like if we had no morality, like it's the core tenet of morality, then like who are we and like where are we going? And that can be like both a good thing and a bad thing, because it means either that we're going to be our own salvation or we're going to be doomed.
Right. Do you, atheists often handle their atheism in different ways. Like, are you like an outspoken, like militant, like I'm atheist? Or do you kind of hide it unless you're asked? Or, like how do you generally approach that?
So that's kind of changed over the years because when I first became an atheist, I was very outspoken and I was very angry. It was sort of like I noticed a lot of atheists who used to be Christians are very angry at God, the God that doesn't exist, because it was sort of like being let down about like all of existence. So yeah, I would be confrontational. I would argue with people. They would say like I didn't respect them, and I'm like, well, you want me to die and go to hell, so like how can we even be on equal footing? And I actually wrote a book called The Crooked God Machine, which was essentially like it was a sci-fi dystopian book about like a terraformed planet that was like its core was like being run by a machine that was like shut as a god, because they were like, well, if we have like actual proof of like a thing that's like helping humanity progress, like then we can not fall into chaos. But then it goes horribly wrong because the God of the Old Testament has a very twisted perspective of how things should be run. But I think as I've gotten older, I am less confrontational just because I've seen how ineffective that is.
Right.
I think people defend their views. Well, I've read like scientifically, like when someone challenges an idea, we get the same physiological response as if we're being physically threatened. So I think a better way is just like to have the information if somebody would come and be interested in reading it or looking at it, and being less like directly confrontational.
Right. I was curious, aside from the what was that one, the God Machine? Like, your atheism, what other roles how else has your atheism kind of reared its head in your writing or affected, your writing? Would you like to talk about that?
Yeah. So there's also there's a sci-fi writer named Ursula Le Guin. I hope I'm not butchering that name, but she's also an atheist sci-fi writer. And she has a quote that says, like, basically the role of the writer is to find the questions which are unanswerable and then answer them. So I think, like, essentially books like I feel like they teach us how to be human. It's sort of like a more advanced way of like play, kind of like when you see dogs playing and they're learning how to engage in the real world and fight, but without like the consequences. So as humans, like one of the ways we learn is through error. But like our knowledge library is so vast that we can't like singularly learn everything through error. And that's where things like books come in, and then we get like the knowledge of how other people have lived and how like it's possible to live through their experience, and then that becomes like our experience. So I think I'm most interested in like the question of how do we live after God? And it's like I think morality is like a biological imperative, because there was something in us that was telling us like these need to be the core tenets of faith. Like these are the things that like humans need to like follow. Like we need to not kill people, we need to not steal. Like these are good ways to like learn how to be a human. But we don't necessarily know the mechanisms of like what that is. It's like telling us that in our brain. And I think that's an important thing to sort of explore, like who are we without God, and like what is like truth essentially for us.
Right. Okay. I'm curious, like what are your views on the prevalence of Christianity in American society? Like, do you think about it much? Do you, like in the era of Donald Trump, it seems like we're seeing a lot more of it. At least, it's how it seems to me. And, it's like okay to just do whatever, say whatever, and quote religion as the reason. And, I'm curious, like, what are your thoughts on that? How does that strike you? I mean, is it something you think about?
On the prevalence of Christianity in America?
Yeah.
So I think it's dangerous. I think a lot of people have this kind of like live and let live attitude about that. It's kind of like where the coexist. I don't know if the coexist bumper sticker.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I do.
But it's funny because most of those religions like are very monotheistic, and they like are intolerant of all the other religions.
Right, exactly.
So it's sort of like this weird like cognitive dissonance where it's like we can all live together and be peaceful, except like the core tenets of some of these faiths is like exactly the opposite of that.
Right.
And some of these religions are like telling us how to live in ways that aren't really agreeable to people who have different viewpoints. Like it's like whatever your belief is, like on abortion and like women's rights and like the immigration thing, which I've seen being attributed to different religious texts, but as far as I know, there isn't much of a religious precedence for that. And just the way that like people use cognitive dissonance to protect their religious beliefs, I think is a dangerous way of thinking. And it's not a way of thinking that can just be relegated to like a small part of your brain. So you're just kind of like, you can't just be like, I'm going to be rational about everything except religion.
Right.
Because like our brains just don't work like that. So I think it's dangerous in the sense that like we're not always using logic to try to like come to consensus on these problems that we have. We're using more of like the feeling and like the tribalism.
Okay. So I'm curious now that you live in a more liberal place, and and you're an atheist. Like, what does your world look like? Like, do you live in a bubble? I mean, are you surrounded mainly by people with similar beliefs, or are there still Christians in your midst that you hang out with, and if so, is it difficult to coexist with them?
So I actually do kind of live in a bubble. And I'm a writer, so I spend a lot of time just by myself.
Right.
And my partner, he's an atheist too, so we have similar beliefs.
Yeah.
But I don't run into a lot of Christians on a day-to-day basis, and if I do, we generally don't talk about religion.
Right.
And I feel like the internet's kind of self-selecting. They found that the internet has actually kind of narrowed our views because of algorithms to show us similar things to our interests. So I find that I try to friend different kinds of people on Facebook, but I find that they'll usually self-select themselves out of my friend pool, or I just won't see those people.
Right, that makes sense. You mentioned your boyfriend being an atheist also, and that's definitely helpful. I'm curious. See, the main thing I've seen as an atheist as a single atheist, is that when I've gone out to date other people, it's usually them. If they're a Christian, they're like, I can't date you. And, it's usually not.
Sorry, I didn't hear that last part.
I do think it would be difficult to date them, but I'm curious, before you met your boyfriend, would you have dated a Christian, or do you just pretty much rule that out? Just say, I'm going to skip that headache altogether.
I don't want to say for sure, but I feel like the answer would be no, just because the way that we thought about life and how we wanted to structure our family would probably be fundamentally different.
I'm sure, yeah. Okay.
And I can't imagine that a Christian would I can't imagine that they would be okay with me going to hell from their perspective.
Right. And if they are they're not obviously a very good Christian, I don't know, it's all fascinating.
Right.
Although I find that, let's be honest, most of them really aren't, because they pick and choose. They're like, well, I like this rule, but I'm not so big on that one, and go ahead, I'll cut my hair and I'll eat shellfish, but I don't like gays and I don't like abortion.
Right.
But so you're saying you're going to be moving back to Oklahoma anytime, right? You missed the conservative life, I guess, right?
It's possible.
Oh no, don't do it. As somebody that lives in this part of the country, let me tell you, you're free, girl. Don't do it. So, have you had many?
I can't imagine it would be too much fun. Yeah.
No, it's not too much fun. It's pretty awful. So, have you had many bad experiences with people? Once they found out, or if they find out that you're an atheist, have you had anybody be really kind of shitty to you? Or?
Mostly I don't even know if I want to say this. I have had bad experiences with my family, but I don't want to get into specifics.
No, I get that.
In case they were listening to this.
No, I get that.
But yeah, I think it's mostly the people closest to you who are the ones that are going to get the angriest, because they feel like your eternal soul is in trouble.
Right.
But in general, before I was a writer, I worked in game development, and generally I feel like game development is more liberal and more secular. So I never really ran into huge problems with that.
Right. That makes sense. All right. As far as, the way that religious people see atheists, obviously they have a lot of misconceptions about us. In your experience, what do you see as being maybe the biggest misconception about atheists? Or is there any one particular one that just kind of annoys you?
One thing that I've seen is that a lot of people think we're all Richard Dawkins.
Right.
We're all angry, usually white people, usually male, and just kind of jerks. And also that we're immoral. It was funny because I was just looking at stats on religion, and atheism is I think I think Islam surpassed it, like in the last few years, but atheism used to be like the most hated group in the country.
Right.
Because people think that they are sort of like going against the values of like America.
Right.
Which is funny because the founding fathers were not Christian. Not really, but.
All right. Well,
I think the biggest misconception is that like without God, there's nothing keeping us from being like serial killers or like just burning the world down. But morality is also like a biological imperative, so it's difficult to explain that to people.
Right. All right. Well, before I let you go, what kind of projects do you have on the horizon? What do you got coming up? Anything that we could be looking for?
So I do have a book coming out from Christoph's press, but it's not really about anything that we've discussed.
Right.
I had written a lot of like religious stuff in the past, and I'm sort of like moving away from that. But yeah, I'm always writing something. So.
Right. That's cool. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me, and we kind of bounced all over, but I had a good time talking to you.